Speaker recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Environment and Conservation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed an honour to speak in this House and reflect on the circumstances, experience and support that have me standing before you all today. In the next few minutes, I'd like to speak about, I guess in the next 18 minutes, I'd like to speak about the strategy, or perhaps just the fate, but certainly the lessons learned to bring me to this point in my life. But certainly, I might suggest that my path to this House is not typical. But on the other hand, perhaps all 40 of us can say the same. We all have our own unique stories that reflect on the diversity and the opportunity that exists within Newfoundland and Labrador. So I was born in Nova Scotia, and I grew up in a small village called Clementsport. I'm the 6th generation of a German Hessian soldier who was also a forester, by the way, like myself. He settled in the area after the American Revolution, and by the way, he was actually captured in Trenton, New Jersey by Washington, spent most of the war in prison, and then they shipped him up to Nova Scotia. So there you go. With that upbringing of hunting, fishing, and other outdoors pursuits in combination with some very good teachers, set me on a career path of science. So in 1979, I headed to New Brunswick and the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton to obtain a degree in forestry and wildlife management. Following graduation, I began a routine of working various research contracts throughout the Maritimes, Quebec, and Ontario. I did that for several years. And then in 1987, I heard about an opportunity in this great province. And I secured this opportunity in Labrador. It was around conducting research in association with the environmental assessment of a proposed NATO base at Goose Bay. This position was with a company called Jakes Whitford. It was supposed to be temporary, but I was looking for northern adventure, so I packed up all my belongings in my Ford Ranger and headed to St. John's to report to work. It's going to start sounding like the member behind me here now in a second. I arrived in Port aux Basques in June of 1987. I'm home. Thinking that all the campers in the gravel pits were an indication that the provincial parks were sold out, I spent my first night in a gravel pit as well, thinking that I had to avail of this overflow option, not understanding the concept of gravel pit camping. So within a few hours, I was introduced to the wonderful hospitality that truly distinguishes this province. The next night, I arrived in St. John's and set up living arrangements. Where else would a guy set up but in Pippi Park? And it is an ironic twist of fate that I find myself now as the minister responsible for this park and enjoy certainly every day a great view of this place that served as my first set of accommodations for my office at Environment and Conservation. Languages have always fascinated me. I've found that my interest and abilities in this regard have assisted me in the development of my career. Growing up in Nova Scotia and surrounded by the Acadian culture, I was a supporter of the move to enshrine French and English in our national identity. I pursued studies in French throughout high school and later at the Université Laval in Quebec City. Par exemple, j'étais en train de travailler au Québec quand j'ai reçu une offre d'emploi associée avec une grande étude environnementale au sujet des vols militaires à basse altitude. Il y avait une grande opportunité, puis j'ai commencé avec une grande aventure qui c'est vraiment la province de Terre-Neuve et Labrador. These additional language capabilities assisted me in securing work beyond that first 3-month position of that offer back in 1987. Reflecting back, I'm also old enough to remember the excitement and mystery around the very famous 1972 hockey series between the Soviet Union and Canada. I always had an interest in Russia, and as perestroika and glasnost became concepts of international thawing, I found myself beginning to work in a variety of locations throughout the former Soviet Union, starting in 1990. It certainly was an interesting time. With the language and cultural understanding edge, I stood out amongst my peers and became the director for Russian operations for the company. So I enjoyed 14 years of adventure and professional experience working for CETA, the United Nations, and the World Bank throughout that vast land. A highlight
Order, please.
was joining the Premier and other business representatives from Newfoundland and Labrador on the Team Canada mission to Russia in 2002. So there we were, 30 years later, at a grand banquet in the Lizhniki Stadium in Moscow, having lunch with the famous hockey players like Tretiak, Cournoyer, and so on, all from that very famous Summit Series. It was indeed quite a meal. We were certainly in a good mood, as Newfoundland's own Iceberg Vodka company in the representation had just secured a major distribution deal in a land where vodka reigns supreme. Another example of the kind of fate that I reflect on is how I came to meet my wife, Caroline. While working seasonally in Labrador and living in St. John's in 1990, some friends invited me to a Taoist Tai Chi club for some exercise. Well, I met her on that very first class, and I always joked to Caroline's parents that I always believed that they thought she might find a nice Chinese guy there. Well, that didn't work out according to their plan, but it did result in my finding my lifelong partner and my #1 supporter. So my wife is Chinese. She was born in Hong Kong. And given, you might know the operation, given I'm the Hong's only son-in-law, this is over in Hong's Takeout, I still retain the title of being #1 in their eyes. Joking aside, her parents, Lan and Yan Quan William Hong, operated Hong's Takeout on Torbay Road for many years. I believe it's about 30 years. They proved that a strong work ethic, attention to quality, and care for your clients can secure a successful position in society, even as immigrants to this country. A couple of years ago, as I was pulling back in my career as a principal scientist with Stantec Consulting, I found that I still had plenty of energy to give to a variety of important causes. I was involved in the Chamber of Commerce, Great Labrador Canoe Race, a bunch of sporting, economic development, and so on. Still lots of energy, so it was actually the MP for Labrador, Yvonne Jones, and others that started me down a different path of serving society. So in the spring of 2014, I started. And as momentum built in the months leading up to the election, so now was a new feeling of being humbled by the volunteers. And it is interesting, several of us have noted this week that it is Volunteer Week. Well, as a guy who liked to volunteer all of his life, I found it very humbling that people were now volunteering to help me in this political direction. Volunteering is one of the most important ways that we can give back to society. Both my wife and I have thoroughly enjoyed the response and appreciation that comes as a result of this sense of giving. I was and remain amazed by the fact that the effort of so many people that just gave of their time during the election campaign. This was very much a different feeling. Some of them were busy, frankly, some of them were ill, and some of them were gravely ill. And others were just people I didn't know well, but they all showed up, and they showed up every day and helped me at the doorstep. And I know that I will always remember this sense of indebtedness to them and the residents of my district. Certainly if I'm going to ensure that I do my best to support them every single day. It was also a great honor to have my parents, June and Wendell, join me in these last days of the election campaign. They have spent their lives working on numerous provincial and federal campaigns. Their advice and support was greatly appreciated. I do remember my father kissing Margaret Trudeau once in the early 70s. I thought he was going to leave the family, but anyway, he did stay, and that's good. A few names I'd like to mention, if I may. A couple of key people. My campaign manager, Henry Windler, the barber across the street, who was just a great support, Henry White, Bridget Murphy, Michelle Bakey, Bernice Tracy, Max Butler, Heber Keats, and very many others all showed up day after day. And it was a great team. It was a lot of fun. But there are two people in particular that I would like to mention who are both, unfortunately, no longer with us. One is Uncle Max Winters, a well-respected Inuit elder who provided sage advice in making sure that I reached out to the people and learned to speak for the people. As he battled cancer, he somehow found the energy to visit me regularly to discuss these issues. Uncle Max was a Habs fan and thoroughly enjoyed a visit from the then leader of the opposition, now Premier, regaling the triumphs of Les Canadiens. I decided not to tell them on that afternoon. They were having so much fun that I was actually a Bruins fan. Hey. The other very important person who we've lost in the last little while, who helped me a lot, is Dee Wells. She was my campaign coach. She just came to me about a year ago. She started exploring all matter of presence and communication and how you can aspire to be an effective representative and the importance of being grounded. She was tragically killed in an accident just a few days before the election, and her wisdom will always live on with me. So here I am, a member of the House of Assembly for the District of Lake Melville, some 29 years after I first showed up with my Ford Ranger in this wonderful province and pursuing this career of adventure. The question is now, how do I give back? Over the last few years, I've been thinking about how decision-making could be much more effective if we could think about the implications of our decisions over a much longer period. Last week, I spent a few days with Carolyn Bennett, the Minister for Indigenous and Northern Affairs. She talked about how effective Aboriginal leadership considers the implications of their decisions 7 generations out. In many ways, this analogy equates to the concept of sustainability, something that I've worked with all of my career. So my proposal in my district is to develop a long-term plan, and I'm referring to the strategy as Plan Labrador. So I'm working with various organizations, groups, and individuals throughout Lake Melville to solicit answers to 3 questions. Number 1, where do you want to be in 25 years? What does that look like? How do we get there? Then working backwards, the next question I'm asking is, how should we accomplish over the next 4 years the mandate of this government? How should we get there? What can we do? And then finally, I'm asking them, of course, what are their immediate priorities? This information is coming in now, and we are reaching out across Churchill Falls, Northwest River, Shasheet, Happy Valley Goose Bay, and that great old community of Mud Lake. We're compiling the feedback. I'm proposing to present the information in my first newsletter. Subsequent newsletters would then serve as a report card for documenting and sharing progress toward the answers of these 3 questions. I believe this structure could serve any location in the province, thinking strategically and looking further out than just a few years. Infrastructure needs are great throughout Labrador. With its role as the administrative, transportation, and political hub of the region, Lake Melville needs to have an organized approach to decision-making. The Trans-Labrador Highway, for example, is not just a connector road in a region. It is actually the main artery through which this entire province will be able to access goods and services from central Canada. Until the highway and the crossing at the Strait of Belle Isle are complete, this artery will remain severed or at least hampered with limited circulation. The resolution of outstanding land claims by the Innu Nation and the Nunatukovut Community Council will bring stability to the region and a sense of purpose for thousands of my constituents. The advancements of the Nunatsiavut government demonstrate how the Aboriginal people of the province can make a positive contribution if they are supported and if they are given the opportunity. The presence of these 3 Aboriginal groups, Newfoundlanders who made their way north to work on the construction or operation of the Goose Bay Air Base, or other construction, other Canadians, and many European military personnel who decide to stay after their tours of duty on the wing, plus a variety of other cultures, really give us a very diverse population. Each of the 5 communities that I just mentioned are unique and add further diversity in terms of needs and desires. Access to facilities and services remain a challenge for Lake Melville. Despite the central location, the cost of travel, particularly by air, is prohibitive, yet necessary, particularly when seeking specialized health care. There are many other important issues in Lake Melville, from the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric development, finding a role for the Paddon Home, creation of a wellness center, stability and securement of an operational requirement at 5 Wing Goose Bay, support for the underground mining expansion at Voisey's Bay, support for the mining colleagues in Labrador West, and so on. These and so many other issues in Lake Melville and throughout Labrador will require close coordination. I am very pleased that the Premier has formed a Labrador caucus in which the 4 MHAs that my colleague from Lab West just referred to, from the Big Land, we are all able to tackle important regional issues together. Ultimately, if we are all to succeed, If we are to succeed, I suggest that a litmus test would be to ask our future generations whether they feel options are available to them for the youth of Labrador or any other region of this province. And if I may, I'd just like to comment about my three colleagues. I'm getting to know everybody in the caucus. The member for Tornegat Mountains and I actually used to spend a great deal of time in a helicopter doing waterfowl surveys today, and if you together. And if you want to see a man who's very capable in the field, it's that gentleman over in the corner. My other colleague from Lab West, we've had many competitions in debate, but mostly around the golf course, and speaking about different bets and so on. So we continue to have a lot of fun together. And finally, my other colleague in Labrador, Cartwright Lanceclair, I was telling her when she was helping me a lot on the campaign that she shouldn't be afraid of dogs, and she had this fear of them, and I was helping her to overcome that. Well, on the very last hour of the campaign, I mean, that's Sunday before the election, so the 29th, last house, I'm going up to hang a door knocker. There was a dog barking. It was a good Liberal supporter, so I thought he needed to get there. And everyone was concerned anyway. I still approached the door, and that dog bit me twice. So it can happen. On the 13th of December, I was invited by the Premier to join him at the Cabinet table. So in my responsibility for the Environment and Conservation, Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, Labour Relations Agency, and the Multi-Materials Stewardship Board and Francophone Affairs, I am proposing to conduct myself in a manner consistent with my career to date, namely that decisions should be guided by principles, factual information, and/or science first. In other words, objectively driven, then implemented with the appropriate energy and emotion. I believe this is another aspect of the transparency that our party campaigned on, and one that I am proud to contribute towards. Whether it be ensuring wise decision-making regarding resource development, the protection of resources such as drinking water, wildlife resources, or natural areas, or joining the Premier and the Prime Minister in addressing climate change, communication of the rationale for action will be important if we are to seek the cooperation of the residents of Newfoundland and Labrador. Finally, I want to thank the very good support of my constituency assistant, Bonnie Learning, and of my executive assistant, Ian Murphy. I also want to thank the supporters, residents, and yes, even the critics in the district of Lake Melville. They keep you very honest. We all want what is best for the area and for the province. Working together will help us achieve our dreams. I look forward to the coming years. Nakamik, thank you very much.